Thank you for reasoning together. This is Wretched Radio, trying to add a helpful voice to the cacophony of voices competing for answering the question, how do we respond to a government that is behaving very poorly? And there have been different Christians in different eras that have responded differently to that very same question, which should give us all humility, and that is what you have shown. You sent in emails disagreeing with the position that I took or how I maybe noodled through it, and it was lovely, honestly. It was so refreshing, because on the times that I do flip by cable TV, just on the cable news, everybody and they're sharp and they're angry, and you weren't, and that was beautiful, and I thank you for that. And I would like to continue the conversation so we can work through this as best we can, helping one another. Sharpen me. If you think that I'm doing it wrong, send me an email to idea@wretched.org, and I will respond. The question specifically that we're trying to answer now is, how does Romans 13 apply to our current situation? Do I need to submit when they are behaving in a way that I do not deem to be within the confines of what some people believe Paul laid down as the restrictive role of government? Now, I will say this, and here's where things get very messy very fast. To the folks who would say government's role is limited to nothing but punishing evildoers. In other words, all they're supposed to be are police officers and soldiers. That's it, because that is their restricted role. Now, I believe that that is a role for them, but now suddenly we're confronted with a bit of a challenge. If indeed the doctrine of lower magistrates is correct when it says we have the right and the duty to respond to unjust governments in a resistance-like way, does Paul intend that in the text? Did he say you need to submit to the government because this is their role and function, therefore they can't do anything else? If you adhere to the lower magistrates doctrine, may I ask some questions? And I'm not trying to be cheeky with this. These are genuine questions. How do you noodle through all, therefore, of the acts that the current government is doing that would be deemed unjust because they are not strictly restricting their authority to what Paul gives them in Romans chapter 13? So, for instance, public schools. That would be outside of their Romans 13 purview, wouldn't it? What about highways? Now, I agree. I think we could take care of it just fine as private citizens. But my question is, if you believe that the government is limited only to doing police work, to punishing evildoers, to be a force of good, how is it that we're permitting them to do things that we would say fall outside of that? Because wouldn't that automatically make it unjust, even if it isn't that presumably threatening? They want to build some roads and bridges. It's not a big deal. Well, it would be a big deal if that is not their role, and therefore anything outside of their role is causing them to behave unjustly. Shouldn't we have been resisting, therefore, the government long ago? I ask rhetorically. And that is something that I think needs to be thought through on this subject. Here's another question. I'm trying to contribute to our sharpening conversation here. Why doesn't Paul and Peter lay out at least some specifics or say overtly, therefore, because the government's role is to bear the sword, if they do anything else, resist? They didn't say that. I have to pull that out of there. And I just don't think that I'm standing on really, really sturdy hermeneutical grounds for that. Here's another question. Without having guidelines given to us in the Bible, what are they? A tax rate I don't like? You want to know a tax rate's driving me absolutely bonkers? We're going to be taking a trip to Minnesota, get to preach on Sunday morning and do an event with a pal of mine. And the taxes on car rentals, are you kidding me? Seriously, I'm looking at it and going, I think I'll Uber everywhere or just rely on the kindness of strangers to take me someplace because the taxes on car rentals are preposterous. Service fee. Oh, how's about any of the taxes at the airport that are extra? Is that a line? How do we know? What are the issues? How do we determine it? And how do we keep this doctrine from becoming mob rule? Might is going to make right? I think that there are so many challenges to this particular doctrine that I just don't know that we can comfortably say, yes, this is what Paul was endorsing in Romans 3 or Peter in 1 Peter 2 or Paul in Titus chapter 3. The doctrine, I think, has some deficiencies. Now, does that mean submission doesn't have issues? Of course it does. Of course it does. And I tried to lay out the caveats, the exceptions. If there was if somebody's trying to hurt you, you can flee. You can protect your person. Yes, resist in that regard. But when their government is simply behaving in a way that gets up my nose, I don't see that, especially when it comes to an issue where there is such a mess of information out there, which brings us back to your emails. A lot of people sent an email to idea@wretched.org stating, well, how are we supposed to, who's telling the truth here? I grant you, that is a massive problem. And this is why I don't think any of us should be like, yeah, I'm totally right and you're totally wrong, dummy. This is tricky business that we're talking about. It's not easy to be submitting to a government that does not behave justly. And so we take a look at all the data that's out there, and you are probably seeing conflicting information. That's why I encouraged you need to do your research. Some people sent an email saying, I can't do that because I don't get all the information that's out there. Well, I grant you, tragically, at this day and age, we are being censored and materials are differing voices are not allowed in the conversation. Staggering. It's just staggering. You got to go use a different search engine. It's out there. You just have to use a search engine that doesn't do that, and they do exist. You can get that put onto your search bar so that you will have a freer access to all of the information. Let me dive into some particulars with some of the emails that were sent into idea@wretched.org, and I still invite you to do that. Here we go. This is from Sean. What happens if your governing official is not abiding by Romans 13? That's precisely what we are trying to resolve and answer, and I think we should all be seeking to do that. Throw it out on the table. You want some interesting dinner conversation that doesn't revolve around how terrible our government is and all these people, what they're doing, and the Nancy Pelosi? Talk about Romans 13 and how it applies when a government doesn't behave in a just way. What if the governing authority has made themselves illegitimate and untrustworthy based on their actions? Yeah, that's a massive bummer. We're told to submit. There they are. They're the ones in authority. So we submit unless, Acts chapter 5, or your person is being threatened. This is a great question. This is just really thoughtful. And several people, it wasn't just Sean who asked this, which authorities am I supposed to listen to? Nuremberg says one thing. We signed that. Geneva Convention says the Civil Rights Act of 1964, Title VII in particular. That law tells me I do not need to have something shot into my body. But the current people are trying to suggest, no, you've got to do that. This is a problem, and this is a challenge. I get it. I don't deny it. I'm not trying to take the simplistic approach or say that one side is tidier than another. I'm trying to be fair in pointing out the deficiencies in both understandings that need to be worked through and thought through carefully. Do you submit to the federal government or the state government? State government or local government? The mayor or the city council? It gets tricky. My response to that would be our overall trajectory is I submit. What if they got there unjustly? Yep, they're there and they're God's minister. And so I submit. Unless the exceptions, of course, I do what I'm told. Why? 1 Peter 2 makes it so clear that we might win people. There's something bigger at stake here than Western civilization. Yeah, I'll go that big. Something bigger at stake here. The souls of men, women, children, the eternal. And our actions need to be supporting our testimony and not doing things that cause people to look askance. That is why we do what we do, and that should be our overall trajectory. And yet, not everybody agrees with me, so we'll share what you say next on Wretched Radio. So what are you thinking? This is Wretched Radio, trying to walk through a rather pressing issue these days, mandated V's. What is the Christian response? Wrangling through Romans 13, 1 Peter 2, Titus chapter 3. Are we told to submit with exceptions? I think those exceptions come from outside of those particular texts. They are not limited inside of those particular texts, but there are times when we don't have to do what we're told. We're being threatened. Our lives are at risk, which is why I said for a Christian who is thoroughly convicted that this is a risk to life and limb or a health risk that would be very damaging in the future for me or potentially for my children, I do believe you would have biblical grounds, and tacking onto it Romans 14, a conscience issue, you can't sin against your conscience, then you would have, if you will, a religious exemption, and which, by the way, this might be helpful. Religious exemptions. Go to the search engine that allows you to find these things. I happen to have one in my hand. Affidavit of exemption on religious grounds from college workplace immunization laws and rules. You should, if you are in that position, you should find a form like this and exercise your rights. Do that. Mass resistance, being zealots, I don't think that's what we get. Let me just share with you some of the contents of this. It might be helpful for you. It's a legal-looking document, legal name, fill in the blank. The undersigned do hereby swear and affirm that I am a member of a recognized religious organization. By the way, you need to make it clear these are personal religious views, because if you say they're institutional views, the institutions have been unclear. Roman Catholic Church, for instance, the Pope has said, get the vaccine. Otherwise, you're not loving your neighbor. The local and nationally, the archdiocese are saying, don't give any religious exemptions. So you're in trouble if you connect yourself to a denomination. It is a personally held religious conviction. The immunization required by governing authority name are contrary to my religious tenets and practices. On this basis, as the above referenced immunization requirements violate my right to freely exercise my religion as guaranteed by the First Amendment of the Constitution of the United States, I am asserting my rights. You can do that, Christian. To an exemption from governing authority name immunization requirements. Another paragraph that's helpful. You should know this. I qualify for this exemption based on the First Amendment of the United States Constitution and 42 U.S. Code 2000A, prohibition against discrimination or segregation in places of public accommodation, which states, quote, all persons shall be entitled to the full and equal enjoyment of the goods, services, facilities, privileges, advantages, and accommodations of any place of public accommodation as defined in that section without discrimination or a segregation on the ground of race, color, religion, or national origin. Failure to uphold 42 U.S. Code 2000A may be met with legal action. That's this document. Additionally, per the U.S. Employment Opportunity Commission, the EEOC, which enforces federal law prohibiting employment discrimination, employees must offer religious and disability accommodations to vaccine requirements. I encourage you, if you are of that persuasion and you have that conviction, do not sin against your conscience, but proceed as wisely as possible. Now, This particular document, I don't believe is as thorough as a document can be. I do believe, citing Title VII, I do believe citing Nuremberg and Geneva are very helpful. And you should proceed really wisely because you have the right to do that. This is from Adam, sent to idea@wretched.org. He says, our government is under a constitution, not a dictator. If we were under a dictator, it would be different. My only question would be why? Now, I know why. Because our document gives us permission, potentially even for forceful resistance. But does God? Is that what he wants us to be doing? Knowing that there is something higher at stake here, which are the souls of human beings. And it is about our testimony and living in a way that doesn't cause anybody to stumble over us. So I would simply ask, if you're at that position, hey, the Constitution kind of gives me the out. You know what? I would say, you're right, it does. But does God? Is he going to sign off on that petition? That's what we're seeking to answer. This is from Jason. I won't wear pinwheels on the side of my head. Because I said, if that's what the government commands me to do, if they're not making me sin, I guess I put the pinwheels on. Jason said, because my government in this system doesn't have unlimited authority to command that. I don't argue with any of this. I would not have a leg to stand on if the Bible didn't exist. You would be thoroughly correct, citing the Constitution, your Bill of Rights. You would win the argument. There is no question about that, in my opinion. But does God give a stamp of approval to that when he's seeking to build his church? This was an email that was sent in from, I'm going to keep it anonymous because they asked me to. I have to speak up. So far, I have petitioned some of the government leaders, and to that I say, feel free to do that. His question then is, where does all of this stop? And the answer is, I don't know, but I can tell you where it's going to stop, at my front door if the government tries to come in and hurt me or my family. That's where it biblically stops. Where is our nation going? I don't know. Am I giving the government permission to now continually overstep their bounds? No, that's their sin. I would be sinning if I forcefully resisted because I'm commanded to peacefully submit. So I'm not responsible. If the entire system comes crashing down, and frankly, that is a possibility in our culture, I'm not responsible for that, and you shouldn't be either. I heard somebody, please don't fall for this, I heard somebody recently say, this all has happened on our watch. We're to blame for this. No, we're not. They're to blame for their sin. I'm supposed to be a good citizen. I'm supposed to be a godly person. Don't let people make you the scapegoat for other people's sins. This was sent in long, thoughtful letter, again, from Megan. It seemed to me that this could promote apathy, that this submitting to the government could promote apathy. And when there are many instances in Scripture and throughout church history when Christians took action to meet a need that God seemed to bless their attempts, that could be that the outcome turned out to be pretty favorable. As cited before, history is not pristine. Christian history, church history is not pristine on this subject. There are varying voices. This is an email that is sent in from... Sorry, I thought I was an airplane pilot for a moment. I understand the biblical mandate to submit to the government. My question is, which time do we submit? If the government has previously stated that we have the liberty, citing the U.S. Constitution, Declaration, and has agreed with international treatises against forcing substances into people, but now mandates injection, which time do you submit? I totally feel that. I get that. So here's how at least I approach it. And maybe, just maybe, this is where you and I might be able to find some agreement. This might be movement on your part, but we might be able to shake hands on this. My first reaction to this can't be as an American. It's got to be as a Christian. Because if I let those sentiments and how I was raised and what I was taught about American history, if I let all of that in, and if I understand, wow, this system, it really has a lot of biblical influence. It's caused the most human flourishing, and now they're trashing the place. I am going to become a zealot. So I need to do it. Can we agree that that's our trajectory? This is from Craig. Christians are loving their neighbors if they stand against the mandated risk. Seriously, if everybody submits, the children will be forced to submit and potential major fertility and birth defect risks. Okay. Could that be true? Yeah, it could be true. And I will again appeal to Acts chapter 5. If your conscience, Romans 14, is telling you, no, I can't risk my family's life. I'm thoroughly convicted of that. Then you don't. Then you don't. We're talking about, though, the limits of that. And finally, this is from, so many good emails. This really bugs me. We can't get to all of these. I heard from university professors, smart folks. An authority and or command is sinful if it's in violation of a higher law. Totally agree. Then this person goes on to say, the U.S. Constitution is the supreme law of the land. All authorities swear to uphold it. Therefore, it is a sin to allow a human government authority to violate the U.S. Constitution. I don't think it's a sin because it's not my role. They're sinning if they're doing that. They're breaking the law if they're doing that. But I'm not the law enforcer. I'm the Christian who is trying to keep my eyes on the Lamb, that he might receive the full reward for his suffering, because the souls of humans are at stake. So let's keep noodling through this. Let's discuss it. Thank you for doing it so lovingly, so that you and I can behave as Christ-like as we possibly can. And until tomorrow, go serve your King.
Hey,
Anytime.
sweetie.
Take her around the block a few times?
Who's a good girl? You're not, because nobody does good. No, not one. Romans 5 says we're born in sin and iniquity, and our hearts are deceitful and wicked. You know that if you'd use the law which brings about the knowledge of sin.